And they come on. Are we on? Are we on? Jesus. All right. We've got to consider a few more neural quirks in light of what we were talking about for the last couple of times about the possibility of renaming in that little game three forces, which are the absolute minimum once you begin to see it. Three forces, three kinds of potentials to operate, just to run a reality of three dimensions. And instead of calling it something like C, D, and E, or constructive and destructive and irrelevant, or constructive, resistant, and non-aligned, and all such as that. Did everybody, by the way, since I threw it in last time speaking about Parliament, knowing how many Anglophiles and Parliament files we have here, that it was, I believe, a fairly exemplary example. Considering it from a kind of political paradigm of how it could be that if we took the classical division of politics and the right wing, conservative, and then the liberal, the left side of the aisle, the breakdown of the French, the political situation set up in Parliament, and you could have somebody standing up speaking on behalf of some liberal bill that they're proposing, and then you would have like a conservative resistance to it. Just automatically you would assume that's just the nature of life. And so you've got like a C force, somebody's wanting to change, and then you've got this group that's a D force, and neither one is better than the other, assuming that you're not all wired up to be mechanically caught up in politics. You just assume there's a reasonable part of life, which it is, and that things are moving right along nicely. Thank you, sir and madam. And so you've got one group over here proposing change, and we call that one force. And over here you've got another force that's always saying, wait a minute, come on. We don't need to change that. It's just superfluous. Just don't do it. I don't like it, etc. So we call that the second force. And it seems like a balance. And that passes for the normal operations to the ordinary mind. But there's always a third in the example that I didn't really try to rub your noses in it, because I assume many of you can see it on your own anyway. But consider, in any example like that, whether it's Parliament or any other example we want to make out, the U.S. Congress, or we could bring up a stamp collecting club, or of course you can use your own nervous system. But assume that whatever the subject apparently in question was, last time I think we mentioned national health, let's assume, which is a very safe assumption, that some segment of Parliament has no interest in that particular bill. And there they are snoozing, writing, talking to themselves. But note this, it is not that they're just going to lay out there forever, because generally you've got this kind of arrangement, that whoever proposed this new piece of legislation, this first force, stay with our example of some liberal MP, and then some conservative, he resisted, we don't need to change, so let's assume that they're more or less balanced. Then the other group that has no interest will eventually be drawn into it to keep life running. That some way, to really get down to a crude example, if you hadn't already done it yourself, once they get and they find that no one has a sufficient majority to either pass or defeat the bill, then they have to start going back to where the independents are, or even to some of the fringe MPs that may be titularly a part of their party but not really involved. And so whoever's proposing a bill, or the whip as they call it in America, the liberal parties, he runs back and he tries to get these guys who would be part of the E-pool, like, come on, he talks it up. And if they're not interested, he bribes them, he pats them on the back, he promises, I'll support your bill. So these guys sitting back there that may say that if we stopped everything in that kind of city reality, and we found more or less a third of the people in the chamber at any given time had no interest in the proposed legislation, in the discussion. But if you thought, well, now, even by your own definition, if you were ordinary and said, well, you're saying that there's a third force, but notice that third force, that third pool, is irrelevant. It's not irrelevant, because if it was left at the conservative versus the liberal, or the peanut butter versus the jelly, it is always too close, because when it's not too close, you have catastrophes from a 3D view. And so no matter that many ordinary minds tell people that life is going down the drain, it's not really going down the drain. It maintains some kind of equilibrium. But for it to move, then those that would apparently have no involvement, those who would say, if we're back to apparently talking about actual people out here, those who would say, I have no interest in this legislation. I'm doing my job, I'm representing my people, but this piece of legislation I got no interest in, or whatever story. I've got one I'm going to introduce myself next session. It doesn't interest me, but that's not the end of it. It has to finally interest them, if for no other reason that the first two forces, in this case the liberals and the conservatives, them fighting to either pass or defeat the bill, they got to get back there. I'm using back there relatively, figuratively speaking. They got to get back to those who have no interest in this particular piece of legislation. In other words, this particular apparent thrust of energy and its the resistance there too. They got to get back there to those who are currently non-involved and say, come on, get involved. They got to. At any rate, I thought, or whatever I thought, it's over with now. Okay. So instead of, if you recall where we were, instead of just calling it the thrust, the push to change, and then the automatic resistance to change, always there, and then the third force that seems to be very elusive, very spooky, the irrelevant. And we had been already talking about expanding a little bit on renaming them. And I mentioned that the first one we could rename the common, the familiar, the expected force. And then the second force you could, in sort of a speciously humorous way, I was referring to the second force, our renaming, to call it the what do you want force. In the sense that there sits a nice conservative or liberal minding his own business, and from the other side of the aisle, from the other side of reality, up jumps somebody hollering, wait a minute, here's what we need to do. Of course, now you can forget Parliament and look in here. Suddenly you hear an idea, or an idea just seems to come upon you, minding your own business, being the decent man or woman I know you are, and suddenly this just, I don't know, just this untoward idea. Maybe somebody told you, maybe you read it in a book accidentally, you didn't mean to, and this idea just suddenly come to your mind that says something like, maybe I should lose weight. Maybe I should quit, drinking a quart of Jack Daniels a day. Just something like that. And your immediate response, if you're an ordinary sane member of Parliament, your response is, hey, get out of here. Well, I shouldn't say it that way because I was renaming the other force, but it's like, what do you want? Give me a break. Leave me alone. I'm doing fine. And we were trying to move on to, we had covered some of the kind of third force that I had really renamed, or asking you to consider petitioning this honorable court to rename it the hey, get out of here, because it ends up being frightening to somebody. Do you follow? Because if you had, let's say, the conservative member who has introduced this piece of legislation, he's fighting to get it done, and the liberals, they resist it, or vice versa, you understand. And so then they have to start running to the back rows. They start trying to find the non-aligned, the independents. They got to get their vote to get something done. From one view, and it doesn't matter which one, but let's take the conservative view, that you have introduced the bill and you're up there talking, and suddenly, as soon as the Liberal Party understands what you're up to, boy, they send out their footmen, and they're already in the back rows, hustling people, slapping backs, promising a few beers here and there. From one view, in this case, you understand it's all relative, but from one view then, the conservative looks around and he's getting a little behind, and let's say that physically, tangibly, the previously unaligned begin to stand up and move over there toward the liberals, and they're over there, and you can tell them they're all talking, and he understands, not being a dummy, that and his thing is, get out of here, because you're about to tip the balance. That is, to the previously non-aligned. It's the kind of feeling, without the ordinary intellect having any occasion to put such words on it, I suggested that we could call it, the somewhat frivolous sounding phrase was, hey, get out of here. And then I said you could call it the kind of irrelevant and frightening. Because on the basis that from any of the views of the first two forces, that there they are, if it was just them two, they would always be locked in eternal battle, going round and around. But then something always tips it, unless they just go round and around, and it's like everyone forgets it. It's like a dance, and the couple just kind of drifts off the floor. And one of the forces, without necessarily saying it, but it's something like one force kind of looks at another one like, aren't you tired? Or, you know, I got to go to the bathroom. Or, you know, wait here and I'll be back in a second. In other words, whatever it is, whatever the occurrence in life, it kind of just kind of played itself out. It just, regardless of General MacArthur, or I guess in line with General MacArthur, it just kind of fades away. And you just forget about it. Like people believing they overcame bad habits. You know, when, as we've already established, their hormones simply got old. Yes, I haven't been arrested in years for dressing up like Carmen Miranda and hanging around the fruit stand. And you think, well, that's good. I bet analysis or taking those drugs has really helped you. Well, no, it's willpower. I didn't take drugs. I did it on my own. Which, you know, in life, you're supposed to buy that story unless you realize, well, let's see. The man's now 65. And as much as he drinks, he's probably impotent. And to say that he's no longer caught up in some kind of strange sexual activity, and for him to say, yes, by God, it's surprising what willpower can do, you know, after you get to be 70. But at any rate, were it not for that, if one of those two dancing partners, they're not just going to drift away into the Philippines somewhere or the military sunset. If it is going to stay active, that couple eventually has got to drag in. It's got to become a kind of menage a trois. They have got to pull in somebody off the dance floor, somebody in the back of the House of Commons who currently seems to have no interest, who seems to not be inclined to dance. They have got to drag them in to tip the balance. And so when one of the forces looks up, which of course they do not do literally, well, they might, but when they look up, their feeling, one of the forces' feeling is going to be, hey, get out of here. It's like, you know, who asked you? You know, get out. That would not be the view from the other one, but I picked out the one that I was hoping would make you look in a certain way by calling the third possible force, just for passing functional purposes, to call it the hey, get out of here. Because it is going to, from one view, no matter which of the two counts you might find yourself wired up to be, from what position you might be looking, it is either going to seem to be irrelevant to look and think, well, I don't need it, because you don't realize yet that you're about to be outnumbered if you're taking one view. It's either that or it's frightening, which is get out of here, because you realize I'm about to be overcome. Somebody's about to cut into this dance stuff I'm doing, and whatever it was I thought I had in mind, it's obvious, you know, goodbye Argentina. I'm about to be done in. And it becomes frightening. That it's like the ultimate slipping away of even the illusion that I'm captain of my abattoir. Fate. We're not going to do that cheap joke again, are we? Captain of my fate. All right, are you happy? All right. Now, by God, we're up to date. Now here was what I was going to ask you to consider further. Since we have gone this far and toyed with the emotions, if not the intellect, of this fine neural court, that is, of playing the game that we might be petitioning for new names and terms for this kind of stuff, how about if you took it a little bit further? And what if we reckoned, that's intricate legal jargon, what if we reckoned thusly? That's serious legal jargon. I'll say it again. Thusly. So we tied this into time. What if we reckoned, for the time being, of the common force as being equal to the past? I'll admit this gets verbally, if not otherwise, viscid. But just let me say, we are now using the term equal to, not literally in a mathematical or formally logical sense, but we're using equal to in the sense of one thing being immeasurably collateral to. You follow me? Trust me, figuratively speaking. Don't trust me, but figuratively speaking, try and go with it. that I'm going to say here that try and consider in a certain way the common force as being equal to the past, the what do you want force being as equal to the present, and the hey get out of here as equal to the future. But remember, as equal to is not a literal balanced equation. I am saying equal to in a particular sense of one thing, in this case one force, like the common force, as equal to, not equal to, but as equal to the past, but as equal to in the sense of one thing being immeasurably collateral to. Just really figuratively, trust me. And of course you can go past that. Would anyone like to buy a 63 Dodge? Oh. We here at Big Buddha's Used Cars are your friend. Could you reckon the common force as equal to, unmeasurably collateral to, the past? And shall we hit all three right quick? As quick as seems to be possible. All right. The first one. The first possible reckoning of taking our renaming of the forces and applying them to the apparent, everyday, logical, reasonable, defensible concept of human time, of it being at any particular moment, either we're talking about or thinking about the past, the present, or the future. That covers the full gambit of time. Might there be some kind of immeasurable collateral relationship? And so that's why I was saying, could we consider for a moment the common force as equal to the past? Or consider how the ordinary intellect reacts when it hears references to the past, when it hears references to other men's past thoughts, acts. When they hear about the history of man. Might I suggest one of their reactions, yours, is what? It's like a thing, well, I could have guessed that. Not to start dragging out historical, we could apparently cover a long range of me actually picking out something. If you had just the least amount of interest in something historical and you began to read something about, picking out something huge, the last blow, the final, the cause for the fall of the Roman Empire. And if somebody breaks it down into 2 or 3 sentences, or a paragraph, or a short essay, and assuming that you were interested enough, that you weren't forced to do it, that you personally were wired to be interested enough intellectually, and you read this, is not your feeling, just generally, we're just talking about the ordinary level of intellect, that if I jumped in, or suddenly you could do it to yourself, and you thought, well, what do I think of this? It's kind of like, well, I could have guessed as much. Or somebody, if it was a new idea and you were already wired up to be impressed by the man's credentials as to why a heretofore unpresented view of what happened to Napoleon at that final battle. And it goes into a new description. I don't know what. I can just start making it up, but the guy has some new theory, some new idea. He claims to have some new information about some of the logistic foul-ups, some of the shortcomings of Napoleon's own military ideas, and etc. And it's presented as being a new idea from somebody that, let's say, that you're already wired up, that you're interested in the Napoleonic Wars in Europe during the late period of the great empires, and that you are perhaps interested in this guy. You've heard about this guy's credentials, this historian. So you sit down and you begin to read. Let's just say it's a short article that you can write quick. And again, if somebody jumped into your brain and said, well, what do you think of this new idea? Now, you got to remember, you're wired up enough to be interested. You don't have to be an expert. The feeling about the past, I'm trying to get you to see from an ordinary view, Even though you may think, well, I'd never thought about that. This is a new theory. I've never thought exactly this way. And I said, but describe your feeling that you read it. Yeah, I'm not at all surprised. If it is true, I'm not surprised. Is that not a reasonable description? And now forget history, if you must, down to everyday affairs. You find out your wife's second cousin said, yes, indeed, I might be interested in a used Dodge. If you'll send it over here, if I like it, I'll drive around this weekend. If I like it, I'll send you over the money. You want what you want? $300? Yeah, I'll send it to you Monday. And so you send over the car. You got to go out of town. You say, now take care of it. And I assume you got insurance. So your wife's second cousin drives the car around, and Monday morning you wait to, for him to bring the money by before he goes to work. No sign of him. You finally call over there, and you find out that he wrecked your car and went to jail. He's in jail for drunk driving. The car is wiped out. He had no insurance. You'd let yours lapse while the car was sitting there in the yard. So now we're talking about past history, not the Napoleonic Wars. We're talking about just what happened. What's a man's general feeling? Now, first you will go, what? He wrecked my car? But again, if you know how to do this, you can hear what I'm saying. I'm not trying to prove. It is simply the general attitude of the way life is wired up. Is one force, I was suggesting, has a normally unmeasured correlation to what seems to be time. And when it seems to be the ordinary intellect looking back, hearing about what's happened, whether it was back in the 1800s or whether it was Sunday night, last Sunday night, when you hear about other people's acts, other people's behaviors, other people's thoughts, is it not a fairly common reaction if you're not upset, such as your wife's second cousin wrecking your car? If you're not upset, it's just kind of like, well, ho hum. You could look at it as almost one of the breeding grounds of sarcasm. It's like, boy, am I surprised at that? Or to hear that the church, in the name of when it was really trying to spread goodwill, that now they've even come up with new records that's been hidden or lost, that the mighty Inquisition, Tacomata, even had more fun than we imagined. Now it turns out that twice as many people were killed. Oh hum. And the more sophisticated you are, the more that you might be interested in. And you hear, well, here's the new figures. We'd assume that X amount of hundreds of thousands of people were killed during the Inquisition from such and such a date. But now it turns out there's at least twice that many. The more educated, the more sophisticated. It's almost a feeling like, well, boy, am I surprised. Yeah. Boy, am I shocked to hear that happened. Yeah. You do not, or you have not forgotten that we're still talking about what we had been calling the last few nights a new name for that force of the common, the predictable. Well, I'm going to leave that. But just if you can see it in yourself, there is, I'm suggesting, a real, normally unmeasured, which may be why it sounds so surprising, although words are pretty common, but that there is just a general feeling, and you've got to remember it's all relative, because you could be thinking, you personally, you individually, be thinking back now about history under another situation, and history could apparently be to you. The thinking back could apparently, right at that moment, in an ad hoc way, be a kind of push for some kind of change. But I'm saying that there is a kind of unmeasured, or I was suggesting unmeasured, collateral relationship between this common force and men's just general reaction to the past. Not just, of course, to the past, but to their perception of the past, to them thinking about the past, to them thinking, it could just be a second ago. It doesn't have to be last Sunday, since I've gone from the 1800s to last Sunday. It could be that you're just at a party, and you've been talking to somebody that you was trying to do business with, and they walk past somebody that you know, a mutual friend, and they say something, kind of glance your way, and you hear sort of a cynical laugh, shall we say, and the guy goes on off out of the room, and you go over to your this third party, and you say, what'd he just say? And he said, well, if you asked me, I wasn't going to mention it. but then he says something, he relates something that this guy said negative, picking on you. And what's a man's general attitude? We're not going into some kind of subconscious attempted Freudian analysis. We're beyond that kind of crudeness. And I'm not saying because pretense is part of being alive. And so you may keep a stiff upper lip when he says, well, I wasn't going to tell you this, but since you did ask, and you may have some fiscal potential or relationship with him, and then this guy, your mutual friend, says something about the guy that just left the room, talking about you like a dog, and your intelligence and this and that, and you may go, well, que sera. But what is your feeling? I'm talking about a neural feeling, as they call it. If I jumped down to your brain right then, or you could do it to yourself, and went, boy, are you that calm? You might say, well, no, it kind of pisses me off. If I said, are you shocked that he would say that kind of thing? Normally speaking, when I was threatening to stop, but the past does not surprise people. It is the home of habit. And I'm not saying, you could make up examples, I can make them up to where the past would surprise you, and I could make it up and it'd sound reasonable. Yeah, that's happened to me, or something almost like that. But that is not the general wiring system of man. What man's mind is made to think of as the past feels to be comfortable. Now, I don't mean enjoyable, but comfortable, familiar. It's a feeling you can't be surprised that much by the past. You cannot be. Just, I'm going on. I'm going on by God, whether you and I want me to or not. But there is something there that you need to see. God, I'm about to lie again and stop and go back a minute. See, but things are wired up to where people say just the opposite. It's part of the balance of it. As people even say, the more sophisticated they are, the more they're inclined to say, wait a minute, the past is not familiar. And I can speak for them. I can say, all right, come on, tell me. And now I'm speaking for ordinary intelligence. Quite reasonable. Everyday intelligence. And they say, wait a minute, the past is not expected. As a matter of fact, I have been in analysis now for 10 years, and I've had to go into, I've been hypnotized, and they've given me therapeutic drugs, and it's finally coming out of my subconscious. It turns out my father used to sexually abuse me, or my father used to beat me, and I had forgotten it. So let me tell you this. I'm still talking for them to me. Let me tell you this. Don't tell me the past has no surprises. When I heard that, when it came out and they told me, they'd hypnotized me and did things, and they came out and they played back a tape recording of me, I couldn't believe it. And I was saying, well, now that you mention it, I can remember my father used to do so-and-so, or my mother. That is not familiar. I was shocked by it. Now, I know they say that, but think about it. It's not the way life is. Or people say, well, not just personally. People say, wait a minute, I heard something that came out of history, something that came out of some war, something that came out of when a man overthrew the government, a group over there of soldiers overthrew a government in such and such locale. And at first they just seemed to kind of take over, but now, since a UN commission went in and blah, 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 and it turns out the atrocities, I could not believe what came out of there, the stories. People say that. But do you understand that there is a kind of built-in governor to this shock, to this, now they're telling the truth as far as they're concerned, but this kind of professed shock, amazement at the past, when there is no such. The past is familiar, relatively speaking. It is comfortable. And man's general feeling, even if he can go, I am shocked. The more civilized he is, he may go, I cannot believe this. I sent money to this group when they were rebels, and they said once they took over the government of this other place that they were going to feed the hungry and blah, blah, blah. And now these photographs, this proof, I am shocked. And if you took the man, the more civilized, the more intelligent he is, if you took him away after he got through doing all this, and you said, well, I understand, and if that happened, I'm with you, my heart goes out for the people. Here, have a cigarette and a cup of coffee. And you wait a minute, and then you say, are we all that surprised? The more intelligent, the more everyday sophisticated it is, the man's going to say, well, I'm disappointed, but I can't say I'm surprised. I'm not making fun. But I'm telling you, there is a built-in limitation. There is an unmeasured, I suggest to you, correlation between what we're calling the comfortable, familiar force and the past. Because relatively speaking, as I was going to try to get to, sooner or mother loving later, sometime this year, relative to what seems to be the present and the future, the past is comfortable. It's why it is so often, in case you never thought of it, that the conservatives, the resisting forces, the older you get, what do people do? Let's all hold hands and sing memories, memories. The older you get, if you're ordinary, what do you want to do? Reminisce. Don't try to explain that away. The past is comfortable. Because the past, up to a certain limit, in spite of what people are driven to verbally say, the past has a certain limited threshold of surprise. That's what I was trying to get you to consider on your own. That no matter how shocking it may seem to be, no matter how shocking people say it is, the past really falls more under, relatively speaking, to the other two if we ever get around to them so we can compare them. But relative to the other two, the thing of the past is more like, well, I should have guessed as much. Even though they'll say, I'm shocked by it, I'm disappointed that this happened, but you take the man aside or take your own intelligence, that part of it aside, and say, all right, I understand you're hurt and you're shocked, you're disappointed that so-and-so happened, but come on, are you going to tell me that you're surprised that the guys you backed, the ideas that you put forward yourself, that they have turned and they've been twisted and it's almost become a case for Captain Irony? Are you going to tell me you're that surprised? Well, no, I don't guess I can. I was just, silly me, I was hoping for the best again. I keep trying to, help life and do good, and people do. But the more civilized, the more that they are intelligent just at the ordinary view, this, of course, has no real pertinence in life, but if you take them aside, even yourself, and say, wait a minute, I understand you're disappointed and you're hurt and you're back to loser again, you're back to another madman, or is a madman, a mad idea, a mad plan, and it seemed to turn on you. It became a living example of irony. And I understand you're disappointed and etc., but are you that surprised? Hurt, blah, blah, blah. But disappointed, surprised. In a sense, it's all too predictable. As it's supposed to be. If you can't depend on the damn past, what are you going to depend on? As we will see sometime in the year 2000, whenever we get around to comparing the other two, which is where I was going, since we have 6 minutes. I'm not even going to start on the other two, but I've already set it up for you that I was going to ask you to consider and to follow along the bouncing words, the bouncing ball, of considering that second force, the what do you want, as being equal to the present, and that third force that we were calling the hey, get out of here, as equal to, in the sense of being unmeasurably collateral to, but as being equal to the future. But as long as we're here for a few minutes, how about a judicial sidebar, since we brought it up before, and some of you seem to get something, and all of this, as always, will it be here or in any other reasonable field, such as economics and religion. But now we're in the world of the law. How about regarding the legal principle that I pulled out before and we've used, that you can't slander the dead? Which I assume all of you understand what that means. Once somebody is dead, even under the most liberal interpretations, which I'm assuming is the United States, none of this is important, literally, but that you can slander somebody and be held accountable even through fiscal damages, monetary damages, but once they die, once a man's dead, you can say anything you want to, because a dead man has no cause of action. You cannot slander him. That's why you can say anything you want to about anybody, Roosevelt, Jesus. Who else? I was trying to think of somebody else important. Frankie Valli's not dead, is it? Well, you cannot slander the dead. What I was going to say is regarding that legal principle is, could any of you see behind it, as in everything else, that there is life, that this is a reflection of life doing something else? And it comes out in other places, but this is just a prime, it's just a beautiful example I can't resist. You can't slander the dead. And it seems to be a workable, or if you think about it, it seems to be a just, if you think about it a little bit, principle. Because if you could slander the dead, at any rate, I don't have time going into this, it just begins to get too complex, involved, sticky. It just won't work. It'd drive everybody nuts. Trust me. Think about it on your own. So the principle, even in ordinary affairs, is quite valid. It is just first-class idea. Just an ordinary flow of city affairs is once somebody dies, you can't slander them. There are other things that dead people can't do, but one of them is that they got no cause of action. They cannot, their estate can't sue you for what you said about a dead man. But now, as beautiful and as just and as workable as this, what I want you to consider, that it is a reflection of life doing something else. As always. Could you see it as a reflection of life telling man's intellectual memory that there is no way that it can misuse the past? Huh? It is life, in a sense, giving the intellectual memory carte blanche to rearrange anything it wants to, for very good reason. That it's telling you that there is no way that you can misalign, misuse, do damage to the past via memories, because it is telling you to do whatever is necessary to keep the vital secondary energies flowing. And if that involves, well, I always thought that my father was a pretty decent man, but I don't know. I've been here in this self-help group. I've been taking group analysis here for a couple of years, and I had nothing to say, and everybody else, his father had mistreated him or kicked him around or done something. And so one time we got real drunk, and one of the people here hypnotized me. We was off on some weekend retreat, and they said that, I said later that I was having some kind of nightmares. At first they thought it was the DTs, but then they realized I was getting into my subconscious, and I said, yes, my father did mistreat me. And now I feel much better. All right, from one view, did you follow that? Forget, don't take it as being cynical or something. The point is, from one view, there's no way to prove this, remember, because it doesn't need to be proved. It can't be proved. It can only be noted. But in one sense, people, everybody should know this. They rearrange the past. I mean, the guy that you were trying to do business with went by and made some, and you heard some kind of cackling, and he left, and you find out that he talked about you like a dog. And you were, and just before that, because he was big time in the field that you're interested in, and you were panting about to lick his shoes. But as soon as you heard this, and you realized, well, there's no chance of doing business, then your feeling was, you said to yourself, if not your friend here, at least to yourself, your feeling was like, stuff him. I wouldn't have done, I had no interest in doing business with him or not. Now, I know in the ordinary world, if all this was brought out in the psychological investigation or consideration, they say, wait a minute, this is some kind of compensation for one's shortcomings, one's trying to make up things, one's, fooling with one's mind. The man is just immediately, he's lying to himself. He's creating his own potential subconscious problems in the future, because now he's suddenly saying, it's like going up, you're the most beautiful girl I ever saw in the world. To this girl at the bar, and she looks at you and says, and your thing is, well, I'm who too. I mean, you're staying there with your partner, and you say, what'd she say? No, I didn't give her the time of day. I started talking to her, and I got to look at her. She ain't that much. And you can say, wait a minute, that's sick. You can't do such as that. Wrong. And I'm suggesting to you there's nothing wrong with that. With ordinary people, I know it's part of something else. But it's life saying you can't slander the past. It's not telling you that you've got to, what they call it in the city, lie and make up stuff yourself. It's not saying you've got to, but it's telling you to do whatever is necessary. That it's impossible to misuse the past. It's impossible to turn around and say, well, I didn't really want to do so-and-so, when somebody else was standing there, and they go, wait a minute, he just said 2 minutes ago that he did want to. Then he found out he couldn't, and now he says, I didn't want to anyway. Boy, that's sick. Wrong. That's health. You got to fade, I guess. We'll pick it up here next time, here at the Old Corral. Cowboy Bob, All the other little troopers. Is somebody whistling Happy? Are we off and running an epilogue now? Are we on an epilogue? Hello, all you epilogites. Canada, Arizona, California, Washington, Oregon, Philadelphia, New Jersey, anywhere else. Somebody had an idea. I just wanted to pass along that everyone who was interested, I'm just passing on the idea. Somebody had this suggestion that everyone in the other cities and here, that everybody who, they just suggested it, so I just thought I'd mention it. I mean, it's written right here on the suggestion page that they suggested that I let everyone who was so inclined, even in the other cities, is to send me, anybody who wanted to, their phone number, and then every morning I would call. I guess I'd have to know what time you went to work, but I would call everybody who wanted to, first thing in the morning, every morning, and give you some kind of startup message to everybody. I'm just reading this.